difficult thing was that there was nothing recognizable left to document. The Bradley had been literally blown apart from the floor up, and then the lightweight aluminum composite armor melted in on top of itself. Our World War II-era manuals had never covered the situation that lay before me, and the few times that I had been to the U.S. Army MA schoolhouse in Fort Lee, Virginia, a vehicle recovery of this magnitude had not been taught. As far as I knew, we were breaking into brand-new territory. I had never heard of any mortuary affairs search and recovery team ever recovering remains from an armored vehicle that was so terribly devastated that it had literally melted on top of itself. But as I looked into the faces of the unit members in the distance, humbly staring at the wreck with reverence, and upon their faces I could see that they each wore masks of shock and disbelief. I could only imagine what burning river of emotions flowed through them as they watched us carefully climb over the wreck, pointing out the greasy black spots within the troop compartment, and place little red pin flags for human remain portions. I felt sorry for these guys. It was a good chance that these National Guardsmen had all come from the same community and had known each other's families for years. I could feel the weight of their stares, and I was determined not to let them down. Fueled by magmatic temperatures, the fire melted metal like wax. In the interior, thousands of metal teardrop-shaped pools lined the wreckage. Their sharp-pointed ends greeted us like hungry daggers. The Bradley fighting vehicle's mortal wound, a blast opening several feet wide, crossed the left side undercarriage just behind the driver's seat. Molten metal escaped through the wide crevasse and quickly cooled into a very thick layered puddle of shiny alloy metal beneath the Bradley. Springs ejected from magazines, splintered metal components, and mangled weapon barrels protruded from the slag as if a river of wreckage were frozen in time. Brass casings from a multitude of calibers littered the floor, covering the back of the troop compartment from a few inches to greater. The ammunition boxes or magazines that once held them had burst open and were punctured from the inside out. Fire-ravaged junction boxes had been ripped from their homes and now lay in the tangle, their conduit and wires hanging limp and frayed. The smell was an overpowering bouquet of burned electronics mixed with the light ashy smell of an all-consuming inferno. This fire was so intense that it had turned everything into a light, wispy dust, and the remnant ash held the consistency of cornstarch. When disturbed, the light gray ash would quickly catch the breeze and cover us from head to toe with a fibrous, itchy sheen. The more we disturbed this ash, the more we would be covered. This was gypsum or fiberglass shards from the various heat-shielding blankets that were designed to protect the crew from the heat of the engines. But now the fibrous shards microscopically embedded themselves into our skin, and their presence within our pores drove us crazy with itch. The most logical place for us to begin the recovery process was in the rear of the Bradley. The massive ramp that would normally lower to allow embarking troops into its interior now lay flat on the trailer. Its hydraulic lines severed and its open platform allowed us access into the rear of the vehicle. Slowly and methodically, we carefully swept the debris from each section with a foxtail hand broom into a round rubber oil pan, collecting the surface layer off the solidified mass of wreckage. The tiny fragments were made of shards of melted metal, brass casings, and unidentifiable globules of plastics or silicon. To my surprise, all of this sounded like broken glass as it was collected, and the multiple cuts upon our hands confirmed that it was almost as sharp. Each bucket was sieved through our homemade sifter just a short distance away from the wreck. Anything dime-sized or larger would be caught by the metal screen, examined, and then determined to be of value or not. There were literally millions of small pieces that made up the debris. Each one of those pieces was closely scrutinized, and the ones that closely resembled burned bone or tissue were put through a final test to conclude their disposition. While working with the NTSB in the 2003 Blackhawk crash site, the agents showed us a few tricks that they used for recovery missions. In cases that involved fires, a few curious oddities could occur to the human body when subjected to intense heat. Blood can caramelize and bubble into a substance resembling burned sugar, much like the bottom of grills or ovens. Fats become greasy residue. Flesh resembles burnt rubber or wood, and bone can flake and splinter into tiny pieces.